Yes, sir.
This is just a continuation of what you were just saying. How is jihad defined? You know, we have some people saying it's the whole group has to convert or whatever.
Yeah.
Other people say it's a personal jihad.
Yeah.
What is the traditional interpretation of what jihad means?
The people who say that it's a personal thing are right, but they're only half right because they're only telling you the half-truth. The jihad in Islamic theology is divided into two parts, the greater jihad and the lesser jihad. The greater jihad is the internal spiritual struggle of every believer to conform his life to the will of Allah. And so he gets rid of the sins in his soul, and he stops his behavior that's offensive to God, and he gets with it. That's the greater jihad. A lot of times now I have heard Muslim groups today say, see, jihad doesn't mean holy war, it just means fighting against sin. Well, yes. But there's also the lesser jihad. And the lesser jihad does involve the use of force. Historically, the caliph was the only one who could wage a jihad. The caliph was the successor of the Prophet Muhammad and the leader of the Islamic community. However, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the secular ruler of Turkey, abolished the caliphate in 1924, and there hasn't been a caliph since then. There's tremendous debate nowadays as to whether that means that there can be no jihad or whether anybody can call a jihad, and if so, whom? And Osama bin Laden took it upon himself to declare one. Other people say he can't do that. Other people follow him. And there have been other people who say that it's within the right of an Islamic ruler, like Saddam, to call a jihad. And as a matter of fact, he threatened to, not long ago. Said that if the American army invades, he will call a jihad, and that would mean he would be calling upon the support of Muslims from outside of Iraq to fight.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am.
What it all seems to come down to is a psychopathic death cult. And they're halfway there by denying the humanity of women.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say they deny the humanity of women, but certainly they are very clear in the Quran that men are superior to women, with statements that are much stronger than anything you find in the Older New Testament. But as far as the death cult goes, you remind me of Osama bin Laden saying, we love death as much as the Westerners love life, and therefore we will win, we will defeat them. Now, what's interesting about that is that he didn't make that up. That's a very snappy little phrase, but that's something that you find actually in Islamic history, that often the warriors of jihad have said, we love death, and therefore we will win, because the Quran says that if you fight and die in the cause of Allah, you'll go straight to paradise, and you know, with the virgins and so on. And so these lovers of death then go out and they wage these wars with incredible courage because they win either way. Yes?
I think they're halfway there. Out of the Old Testament.
Out of the Old Testament?
The way they treated women then, and
well, yeah, the Quran in many cases is similar to the Old Testament and even depends textually not on the text of the Old Testament, but Muhammad was retailing stories from the Old Testament and from Jewish tradition. The problem, once again, is that while Judaism and Christianity have been able to develop because of the strong teachings about the equality of rights of every human being before God, Islam has never been able to because of the idea of the Quran as being dictated by God. It doesn't allow for yeah, because there's no slippage, there's no traction, there's no development, because it's all what God said. And so Jesus came along and said, you've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist one who is evil, but turn the other cheek. Whereas in Islam, there's all this single message of be merciful to one another, but ruthless to unbelievers, and so on, and it's all God's eternal word. It's as relevant now as it was when it was written.
One thing about this Jesus, he came along preaching and practicing the feminine virtues of kindness, decency, honesty, and all that jazz.
Kindness, decency, and honesty, absolutely. I certainly think that that's part of the solution here, that if people have the courage, it takes a great deal more courage to live that way than to respond with violence. And if people have the courage to respond that way in a large enough group, then maybe we'll be able to make some traction here.
That's a good way to end.
Well, thank you very much.